Okay, so I just got this in the mail today. It is a bootleg of the GX-71, the red line. I'm sorry for the bad lighting and the low quality. I don't really have a professional setup, but I'm filming this on an iPod Touch on the floor in my living room. But anyway, yeah, I just got this in the mail. So I was going to compare it to the original GX-71 Soul of Jokokin Voltron. But anyway, go ahead and open this up. You can see it says Fantasy Jewel on the box, and that is the company that produces this. So I go ahead and open it up. And I did get this from TF Direct, which I don't know if they still have them in stock. Anyway, it comes with this stand, which I don't really care about. It's not what we're here for. TF Direct packed it really well when they sent it. They had a plastic on the corners of the box so the box wouldn't get bent or anything. But anyway, so here's one side of the box, Fantasy Jewel, and then there's a picture of the toy, and then it does say ages 6+, and that's the model number. This is the only one of the lions that they have produced so far. I did see a picture of the green lion as well, but it was an artist rendering. It wasn't an actual photo of an actual toy. So I don't know if they're producing any more of these or any of the additional lions or what's going on. They haven't said anything. And this is the figure inside the box, wrapped in plastic. And it's got its tail that came loose, which is different from the original Red Lion. And it's got the weapons, and they look like the weapons that came with the GX-71 for the Red Lion. And we'll go ahead and we'll cut open the plastic. Okay, so here's the figure. It does feel kind of weighty, so we'll compare it to the original Red Lion. And here's the weapons. And there's the tail. The tail is different from the one that came, but it is a bendable tail. It's kind of cool they did something different. I did like the box art on it. It's actually looks like it's a drawn picture. I don't know if they took a photograph and then photoshopped it to make it look like an artist drawing, but it looks pretty cool. It's got like a volcano in the background with lava. Pretty cool. Okay, so here we have the Fantasy Jewel bootleg Red Lion, and I'm going to compare it to the GX-71 Red Lion from the original Soul of Jokokin. Here's the box. I brought it out. I shot some inside the house, and then I realized the lighting was atrocious, so I brought it outside. And I'm going to reshoot some of it. But anyway, we'll go over the weapons and the differences in the two lions. Okay, so we have the GX-71 Soul of Jokokin on the right side and the bootleg Fantasy Jewel on the left side. And I have them right now in their arm mode. And first, right off the bat, you can see that the tails are actually different. This is the GX-71. See, it's a straight plastic tail or curved plastic tail. And then the Fantasy Jewel right here is a more flexible tail, and it just snaps on, same as that, but you can see it's all ball jointed, it's flexible. It's cool that they did something different. it's not easy to get off. Okay. Now, right off the bat, go over some of the molding differences on the two lions. So on the Fantasy Jewel, which is on the left, and the Solar Jigoken, I don't know if you can tell, but the molding for the blue part on the backs is different. You can see on the, try and get a close-up of them. The blue on the Fantasy Jewel, it doesn't have all the detailing as the blue on the Solar Jigoken. There's a little bit of a, I don't know how you would say it, crevicing or outlining on the Solar Jigoken that is not present on the Fantasy Jewel. Okay, the coloring is different. The Fantasy Jewel looks a little bit darker red than the Solar Jigoken. The yellow pieces are much more yellow on the Fantasy Jewel and an orange yellow on the Solar Jigoken. We'll go take a look at the heads because there's differences in the heads too. If you look on the Fantasy Jewel, the teeth are actually molded thicker and a little bit larger than the Solar Jigoken. They're more blunted and larger teeth. It does also have the gun turret inside the mouth. On the Solar Jigoken, the teeth are smaller and sharper, and the turret inside is molded in a lighter color plastic on the Solar Jigoken, and it has a little bit more detailing than the Fantasy Jewel. The Fantasy Jewel is smooth, but around the edges on the Solar Jigoken, I don't know if you can tell from here. On the Fantasy Jewel, it's smoother on the edges. For the Solar Jigoken, there's like ridges, very slight little ridges that are missing on the Fantasy Jewel. Okay. Okay, so now on the Fantasy Jewel, we'll also go over the, push that in. Well, actually, that's a good feature we'll bring up right now is the, on the Fantasy Jewel, it does have the arm extension for Voltron mode that the Solar Jigoken has. Now, I'm going to tell you right off the bat that this die-cast piece on the Solar Jigoken is much cleaner, smoother, and the you can feel that the way it moves out, it's tighter. It's sturdier than the Fantasy Jewel is. You know, it's a little bit weaker. It's not as strong. You can also see in relation to the tail joint on the Fantasy Jewel. This is the joint and how it moves. It does have some ratcheting in there, but it doesn't feel nearly as, if you can hear. It's not as good a quality as the Solar Jigoken ratcheting. The extension on the arm, same thing. It's not as good quality. Okay, now we'll look at move them into lion mode. Okay, now right off the bat in lion mode, on the Solar Jigoken, you have foot swivel that you can swivel the feet, you know, side to side. They all do that. And it's so, you know, when you extend out the legs, you can swivel the feet so that he still stands flat on the surface. And then with the Fantasy Jewel, it doesn't have that foot swivel at all. They just bend up and down. So you can see the connectors are different. And that's the Solar Chogokin. You can see the see it's kind of like a rubber joint in there. You see how it swivels. So much higher quality there. The legs do extend out on the Fantasy Jewel. The movement of the pieces on the Fantasy Jewel compared to the Solar Chogokin, you can feel it's less quality. They're not as smooth as the movements of the Solar Chogokin. It's not terrible at all. It's not bad, but it's just not as smooth. Okay. I hope this lighting is better. It's outdoor lighting. You can see the... Hopefully you get a little bit more detail. Okay, now as for paint-wise, on the Fantasy Jewel, you can see the eyes are painted like an orangey color, a yellow-orangey color, whereas, and they're kind of more slit-like. Not as clean either. The paint is not as clean on the Fantasy Jewel. On the Solar Chogokin, it's more of a gold. I don't know if these colors are showing up on the camera as well, but it's more of a gold color, and the paint is much cleaner. The rest of the face is silver. The ears are silver. Got a little bit black on the nose, and that's pretty much the same here. But you can kind of see the brush strokes on the Fantasy Jewel, where it's not as clean, and the edges are not as sharp as the Solar Chogokin. So something I forgot to mention was the gun turret on the back, which the Fantasy Jewel also has. You can lift up. Heft-wise, the Fantasy Jewel you can feel is a little bit lighter. Even though the Solar Chogokin mostly uses plastic, it's sturdier, thicker, heavier plastic. Okay. Now as for articulation, the Fantasy Jewel has the same articulation in the neck. It also has the back movement. Solar Chogokin. Alrighty. Now, another thing you can tell from the Fantasy Jewel is that the mold looks like it's made from the figure itself. Like it's not as though they had the original mold and molded this figure. And the reason I say that is if you look on the Solar Chogokin, there's very fine details in the little designs and whatnot, and they're very fine. When you make a copy from, like a figure like that, and you mold, you're going to lose some of the detailing when you pop it out. So it looks like on the Fantasy Jewel that they went in and they touched it up, because it looks like they're deeper and the lines are thicker than they are on the Solar Chogokin. The figure itself, you can kind of see like the edging is not as sharp. It's a little bit duller. I mean, it's absolutely not bad for a bootleg, but it's still not the same quality. Now the legs, if you look on the Solar Chogokin, you see it's a solid, thick leg. On the Fantasy Jewel, they kind of took some of the plastic out. You can see it's a little bit hollow in here. they hollowed this piece out. It's a thinner piece of plastic, this bottom leg. I don't know if I get that on camera. So they made some compromises there. Now, we'll go on to their weapons, and there are differences in the weapons as well. We'll start with the mouth. This is the Solar Chogokin. As you can see, it has the peg for inside the mouth, so you can peg it in the mouth. Now, if you look at the Fantasy Jewel, what they did on the Fantasy Jewel is they made the blade piece here shorter than the blade piece on the Solar Chogokin, which is longer. The gold pieces are missing. It's kind of ridged here on the Solar Chogokin, and it's smoother on the Fantasy Jewel. The coloring actually looks pretty much the same. The reds kind of match, and the gold kind of match, although the Fantasy Jewel looks a little bit more speckled. Now on the back piece, I don't know what you call this, like a sickle or whatever at the other end. The Fantasy Jewel, this sickle piece is larger than it is on the Solar Chogokin. The Fantasy Jewel also has the peg is red, and the peg is on both sides on the Fantasy Jewel. Whereas on the Solar Chogokin, it has the one peg for the top of the mouth on the one side, and the other side has no peg. So I'll pop that in the mouth. So I point out too that the head on the Fantasy Jewel also extends, same as the Solar Chogokin. So that feature is still there. Okay, I'll put this piece in his mouth. Now that bottom peg, I don't know if it's so you can, I think it's just so you can flip the weapon around, because it does not peg into the bottom of the mouth, but I think it's like the Solar Chogokin, you can put it in one way. That top peg, the weapon's going to be in this position. On the Fantasy Jewel, since they put the peg on both sides, you can actually flip it around. And peg it in the opposite direction. I think that's the only purpose of the double-sided pegging on that. Okay, so we'll go to this little blaster piece or whatever. Okay, on the Solar Chogokin, I don't know if you can see, there is there's the spikes on the Solar Chogokin. There they are. You see the spikes? They are missing on the Fantasy Jewel. It's just a solid round peg. Detail-wise, the cuts into the Fantasy Jewel seem more pronounced. They're very fine on the Solar Chogokin. There's like 1, 2, 3 notches here. There's more notching in the Solar Chogokin, but they're finer. Here they're more pronounced. Same with the notching up top here, more pronounced. Size-wise, they seem to be the same size. Now, interestingly, on the back of the Fantasy Jewel, where it plugs into the lion, there's actually more detailing on the Fantasy Jewel. There's missing here, this detailing that's right here, which seems to be a copy of this side, is also on the back side. That's not present on the Solar Chogokin. Okay, now this what looks like to be a missile launcher. If you look on the Solar Chogokin, it's where the missiles would launch from is deeper. The holes are deeper, whereas on the Fantasy Jewel they're more shallow. The Fantasy Jewel 2 is also missing some of the detailing at the bottom. There's some ridges in the Solar Chogokin around the sides that the Fantasy Jewel is just pretty much smooth. It doesn't have the ridges. Okay. Now, one thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to connect the Fantasy Jewel to my Soul of Chogokin. Reason being is it does look like it's the exact same mold, but the Fantasy Jewel does not look as clean, the molding, as the Solar Chogokin. So I'm not going to risk it getting stuck in my Black Lion. So I'm not going to connect the Fantasy Jewel to my Solar Chogokin Black Lion. So overall, the Solar Chogokin, of course, is excellent quality, top-notch Bandai quality. The Fantasy Jewel is not bad. It's good quality. It's definitely better than the quality you would find at, say, like a Transformer or something, which is really very plasticky and hollow. This one has some weight to it, not the same weight as the Solar Chogokin, and it's sturdy. It doesn't feel like a cheaply made figure. It's just not the same quality. Like the ratchets are not as tight, or it doesn't have the same kind of ratcheting where you can really hear the solid ratcheting. But the Fantasy Jewel is not bad. As for, is it a good replacement if you didn't get the GX-71 and you don't want to pay upwards of $600-700? It's hard to say. I mean, who knows if Fantasy Jewel is going to continue to make the rest of the Lions. This might be like a test piece. They put it out there to see how well it goes. Maybe they're going to release each individual Lion from here on out. And, you know, this is $50, so it's a pretty hefty price tag. But if they're going to release each one individually, it's not that bad because you can drop $50, wait a month, drop another $50, or however spaced out they are. Or if this is a test piece and they're just going to release all the Lions, the next release is all of the Lions in a box set. However, like I said, they made compromises on this, and the mold is not as sharp as the mold here. So these particular arm Lions are not as, the functioning and the connectors are not as difficult as, say, like the yellow and blue Lion. Creating a bootleg of those, taking those figures and making a mold out of them, and especially the Black Lion, which has a lot more detail and the connectors in the arms are a little more complicated. I don't know how that's going to turn out in a bootleg. So they might, like I said, they might just be testing the waters with this Red Lion, see how it turns out. If people, like, you know, want the continuation, maybe they'll continue. But I have seen pictures of a green lion, a Fantasy Jewel green lion, but it was not a photograph. It was more of an artistic rendering. So it would seem like they're planning to release a green one next, but there's been no announcement, and I haven't, like I said, I haven't seen any photographs of an actual prototype or anything. But all in all, it's not bad. If you didn't get the GX-71 and you're thinking that you want a Voltron, but you might want to consider this. I don't know how easy they are to get. I got this one at TF Direct, and I don't think they have any more in stock. It was $49.99. But yeah, I appreciate your watching. Let me know if you have any questions. If you want me to take additional pictures or reshoot anything, let me know. Thanks for watching.